Hi guys, it's Nick here from Evoker again. So we're up to the final tutorial now in this fluid tutorial series, and what we're going to be looking at in this one is just the actual water fluid material itself. So we're going to be looking at getting a bit of a better look in our water using some real-time reflections instead of the cube reflections, and all in all just making a bit more of an advanced water. So what we're going to be doing is modifying our existing water, this simple water that we've created. So without further ado, let's jump in and have a look. One thing I will say before we get too far into the tutorial is this is to be considered an advanced to intermediate shoot. So I'm not going to be going through everything in as much detail as I have in the previous shoots. But mostly we're just going to be editing a material, and a lot of the nodes that I use, if you're not too sure about, you can go across to the Unreal Developers Network and to the Materials Compendium, which is an excellent resource which will actually show you in detail what all of the nodes in the material editor will do, and it will also give you examples of usage of any of those nodes. So they'll give you a little chain here so you can kind of see the type of effect of using these different nodes in different ways. Incredibly handy resource, and I'd suggest to you guys to definitely bookmark the Materials Compendium from UDN. So let's just go back to UDK and let's have a look at getting this material going. So the first thing we need to do is grab the material, or pick the material that we've got here. So I'm just going to turn translucent selection on. If this is off, you're not going to be able to select your water because it's a translucent surface. So I'm going to click that on, select my water, hit F4 to bring up properties, and we can see my material here that we've been building the simple water. I'm just going to hit the magnifying glass so it will find it in the content browser. And there it is. So I still want to keep this water just in case. I may want to use it elsewhere. So I'm not going to edit over the top of it, but what I am going to do is create a copy of it. So I'm going to right click and create a copy. I'm going to save it still into my package, but again, you should be saving it into whichever package is housing all of your assets for this scene. Now I'm going to call it M underscore, so I know it's a material, and let's call it int for intermediate water, and that'll do. And I'm going to hit OK. And UDK is going to have a think about it, and now here we have it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to punch this this copy in to make sure we're working on the copy and not working on the original. So let's just get that in now, and we can close those properties. Now double click on your newly created newly copied material to bring up our material editor, and mine is minimized, I think. Yep, there we go. I'll just minimize content browser now. So this should look relatively familiar. It's the simple water that we created before. There is a small amendment here, which I don't believe was in the simple water that we created. And basically, all that this little bit here is, where I'm sort of multiplying and stripping the blue channel here from this bottom normal chain, is just so the normals will actually mix together correctly. If you don't do this, I mean, the normals will actually mix, but you're just not going to get the proper effect of them mixing correctly. So it's definitely something to suggest, is to throw, anytime you're going to mix two normals together, is to throw a multiply in, put a vector 3 constant, which is just 3 on the keyboard and a click, and you can either strip the blue channel completely, or you can just leave a little bit of the blue channel in there, entirely up to you and what is working with your scene. So that's probably one little thing that we we didn't do in the other one, which you can run in and do now to fix that up. And let's have a look at getting this material going. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually minimize this material for the moment, and we're going to start getting our the correct reflection actors set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab our scene capture cube actor and delete it from the scene. We don't need it anymore, we're not going to use it. And we're going to go up to our content browser. Mine is always minimized. There we go. Across to the actor classes tab, and we're going to do a search for reflect. And here at the bottom we've got a scene capture reflect actor. This is the one we want to use. So we'll drop that in. And you can see it's comes in a little bit different to the other actor we used in that it's a plane and not a sphere. The major advantage of the plane actually is it's super easy to position the reflections that we want using this plane. Now obviously our material still has our old render target still attached to it, so we'll fix that momentarily. So just going to hit F4 on our newly created reflect actor, and we want to come down under scene capture actor, under scene capture, under capture, and then we've got a texture target. So exactly the same story as we did with our other one, we need a render target. So let's bring up our content browser and let's create one. So I'm just going to right click in some gray space here. We actually need a different render target than we used last time. We used target cube. This time we're using target 2D. So I'll click on that, and again, be careful and be very wary of where you're saving. I'm saving into my package. You should save into one package that has all your assets. So this one I'm going to call T underscore, so I know it's a texture, and let's call it real-time target underscore RT. Incredibly descriptive, so the RT tells me it's a render target, and I've got a descriptive name so I know what it is. It's coming from the right factory, which is great. And here I'm just going to up the resolution of that capture actor, just so the reflections will be a bit more crisp. At 256, we'll find that they're quite aliased. So just hit OK, and then we have our new real-time render target. Fantastic. It's not doing anything at the moment, but it is selected, which we want. So I'm just going to minimize this, come over to our scene capture reflect actor, and under the texture target, we want to punch that in, because that's going to be our target. Now, if I just move this slightly out of the way, you can see now that the target is actually starting to reflect and give us an indication of what it is capturing in the scene, which is awesome. The one thing to know about this actor is it doesn't matter how much you scale it. So you can make it as big as you want, as small as you want. It will still reflect and pick up the entire scene. Rotation doesn't affect it at all either. It's purely just translating up and down is going to affect how the way that the reflection is being used. So just under our properties here, there's probably a few other things we might want to look at. So probably the first one here is the frame rate. It's capturing at the moment at 1000 frames, which is pretty silly. So I'm going to turn that down to 60. Probably still a bit high, but you know, that's life. Probably the only other things here is you can choose how you want it to capture, whether it's capturing lit, no shadows, lit, unlit, or wireframe. I prefer lit, no shadows. If you start capturing shadows as well, there's just a lot of overheads that go with that, and it's not always really necessary for a reflective surface, particularly water. The other two, which you may want to use here, is enable post-process and enable fog. This just basically tells the reflect actor whether or not it is it needs to capture and then reflect any post-process that we have in the world. Perhaps like we might have a depth of field blur in general in our environment. And same with fog. It tells it whether or not we want it to capture and then render fog, or if we're happy with the fog we've got in our scene without it being in the reflections as well. So they're the main properties there. That's all good. We can close that. Now, if we come back here, still got my reflect actor here, and we can. Oh, sorry, and I just want to open my material editor again. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, I reckon the first thing we're going to do is nuke this top chain here, which is what was controlling our cube reflections. So I'm just going to click on each of these nodes and delete them, except for the multiply. I'll leave the multiply there because we probably will end up using that in the end. Now, the first thing is probably going to be to bring our new render target in. So we can just drag and drop that from the content browser, and then we can minimize the content browser. So I'm just going to move my render target just slightly behind the multiply here, which is all well and good. I'm going to add a few more nodes here before we test that out and actually apply it to the water. So first thing we're going to look at is come up to our expressions and have a search for screen. And we want to bring in a screen position node. In the properties, we want to turn screen align on for that one. next thing we're going to do is do a search for a component mask. So just search for mask, bring in this component mask, and by default it should be masking red and green, which is actually what we want in this instance. So we'll just hook up the screen pos to the RG mask, come out of that into our texture sample here. Now from there I could really just plug this straight in, but I'm going to do a little bit of extra work before I do that. So I'm going to come up here and do a search for a power node, which we can drag and bring in here. And again, if you want to do a bit more deep research into what these nodes do, go to the UDN Materials Compendium and it will tell you everything you need to know. Now I'm going to hit 1 and click to create a constant. I'm going to hook this up to the exponent of the power, and I'm going to hook my texture sample up to the base. Now in the exponent, I'm going to give this a value of 0.67, I guess, at the moment. That's fine, we can leave that. And in our multiply here, we'll just hook the power up to the A of the multiply. I'm going to hit 3 and click to drop a vector 3. Hook that up to the B. Now, as we know from our previous one, we can use vector 3s for color. So I'm going to double click on it to bring up the color wheel. I'm going to give it something that's relatively, I don't know, let's go maybe a little bit bluey. And what this is going to do is it's going to, similarly with the other one, oh, that's more purpley, I guess. It's going to help colorize our reflections. So we can fiddle around with that, and of course we'll come back and fiddle with this later to get the right sort of color. Just so you know what the power is doing with this constant here, this is just kind of a way of affecting contrast in our reflection. So you can raise and lower this value here to get more or less contrast in your reflection. So now that that's all hooked up, we should be able to actually test this out. So I'm just going to hit the green tick. Now, of course, we haven't actually applied this to the surface yet. So even though we hit the green tick, we won't see anything. Oh, look at that. I'm lying. I must have already applied that. Short memory. Okay. If you haven't applied it, of course, you know it's as easy as hit the fluid surface F4. And then you can punch your material in there, same way as we've always done it. So probably the first thing to look at, I'll just grab our reflect actor here. So you can see as I move it up and down, it's incredibly easy to get the reflections. Even if we move it left or right, it doesn't matter. It's locked to screen space, so it knows exactly where the reflections should be, and it attempts to keep them there. So the only thing you really have to fiddle with is up and down to see where you want the reflections to sit in there. So the one thing is we've lost a lot of strength in our normals, and I'll just turn real time on so we can see what's happening. Yeah, they're still scrolling very slowly, but the normals aren't actually affecting the reflection at all, which is something we want. So we have to do a bit of a chain to get the normals to be mixing with our reflections. So let's have a look at that now, I think, and then we can do some troubleshooting later. So what I'm going to do is come down here, Control-Alt to marquee select my entire normals chain here, and zoom out a bit with mouse wheel. I'm just going to drag that back, and this is purely just making myself a bit of room to move with some of the nodes that I need to put in. So in order to get these guys here to mix, excuse me, I'm going to I'll bring this up so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to hit M to bring in a multiply node up here-ish somewhere. And I'm going to hit 1 to create a constant. I'm going to hook this constant up to the A of the multiply. I'm going to give the constant a value of 0.04 to begin with. We may change this. And coming out of our add, or the result of our mixed normals, I want to put that into the B of the multiply. Now I'm going to mask again here, so I'm actually going to be lazy and just come and grab this mask, Control-C and Control-V, so I can get a copy of it. And again, I want to mask the red and green channels. And then from here, oh, come here. We can put an add node, so just A, and click. I'm going to hook this up to the B. Going to grab both of these and kind of move them back a little bit. Because what we want is we want actually both of these masks to be going into the ad and then coming out of the ad into the texture sample. What this should start doing for us is it should start getting our normals to begin affecting the reflections. So let's hit the tick and let's see if that's actually done what we wanted. Okay, so it has. So we can see there now that our normals are actually affecting the reflections, which is immediately already giving a better kind of effect with the reflections. But obviously we're lacking opacity, transparency, I guess. One other thing you may notice is this green stripe we get along the bottom. This is due to an out-of-bounds rendering error that happens with these real-time reflect actors sometimes. So I'll show you a little bit later some ways that can mitigate it. But just be aware, it is a known problem in UDK. On the Unreal Developers Network, they actually have a little section on different proposed fixes to get rid of that. And it's basically just the default color of your render target here, which is green, and it's actually showing us that there's a problem, that it's rendering out of bounds, and only seems to happen in distorted reflected materials. But as I said, we'll do some fixes later to see what we can do to mitigate that. Okay, so bear with me for a second. I'll just move this down a little bit, give myself a bit more room to play with. So what we'll do now, I think, actually we may as well see if we can mitigate that green issue now. So I'm just going to marquee select and move these back. Now this is one of the suggested fixes that I found on UDN. To be absolutely honest, I found sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So it's a bit of a pain in that respect, but we'll see what we can do. So I need another mask. I'm just going to grab this one here, Control C and Control V, and bring it over here. Now this, I actually want to only mask the red channel. And click off. I'm going to grab it again, Control C, Control V, bring it down here. This one, I want to mask the green channel only. So click green on and click red off. I'm going to come out of the ad into one each of these. One into the red, one into the green. We're now going to come up here and do a search for clamp. And we're going to grab a constant clamp. And again, I'm going to copy that and bring it down the bottom. Red mask into the clamp, green mask into the clamp. And then do a search for append. Grab this append vector node. And we're going to append these channels back together. And then we're going to bring them into the texture sample. Now, as I said, sometimes this seems to work to get rid of that green effect, but from what I've seen, it kind of works in so much as the green disappears, but it gets replaced with a kind of a grey, which isn't really ideal either. So there's another little fix that I was playing with the other day, which seemed to mitigate that, which I'll see if will work for us here as well. Just so you know basically what's happening here, essentially because we're getting an out of bounds rendering error, by separating these channels, clamping them down into what would normally be an accepted value, and then appending them back together, the hope is that should mitigate the UVs rendering outside what they're meant to. But as I said, unfortunately, it doesn't always work. So come back. I didn't mean to close you. Come back. Where are you? Okay. So I'm just going to hit the green tick to commit that. Okay, so in editor we still have the issue with the green. If I come in and play, the issue with the green should be gone, but what we will see is this kind of greeny area here, and this greeny area here should be replaced with kind of colorless versions of it, but the issue is that it's still there. So we'll see what we can do about fixing that too. So just bear with my UDK. Yep. Okay, so we can see we don't have issues with the green, but exactly like I said, on the right-hand side of the window, you can see I've got this line, this kind of colorless line coming, and also at the bottom. So the green is just kind of been replaced with something that's not green, but something that's still equally kind of disconcerting. my reflect actor is not quite in the right place as well. You can see it's attempting to reflect the bot, but it's not quite in the right position. So let's fix a few things here. Let's grab our reflect actor for one. We'll move it closer to the surface so that we'll reflect our actor a little bit better. And the next thing is, let's see what we can do about this horrible green stuff. So let's go back to our material. Now, one thing I found is probably not the ideal way to fix this because it will actually offset the reflections. But the trouble is the reflections are already being offset, so I'm not too worried about it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit M to bring in a multiply. I'm going to hit 2 to bring in a vector 2. Hook the multiply down here into the texture sample, come out of the append into the B of the multiply, out of the vector 2 into the A. Now in the vector 2 here, I'm going to put in values of let's try 0.97 to begin with, and again 0.97 here. And basically what this is doing is it's scaling the, it'll end up scaling this, this render target, meaning that the reflections won't be entirely accurate. However, entirely accurate would be 1:1. So we're not deviating all that far, and to be honest, if it gets rid of this horrible green issue, I'm not too worried about it. So let's hit the tick and see if that's solved the problem for us or not. Look at that, beautiful. So we won't have that problem anymore, which is excellent. We can see our reflections are still accurate. I mean, as I say, they're not 1:1, but to be honest, no one is really going to notice, I don't think. They still seem to be reacting quite well. So let's just go back to our material here, because we still have a fair bit of work to do. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at getting some better transparency happening with these real-time reflections. So I'm just going to grab our existing opacity chain here and just kind of move it, I guess, down a little bit, because we're going to need some room to build on top of it. And similarly, I'll Control-Alt marquee select our normals here and just move those very slightly out of the way so we have a little bit of room to move. Now, okay, so unfortunately here we're going to have to build a fairly large chain of nodes before we're going to be able to test them, which is never ideal, but that's just the way it's going to have to happen. So I'm sorry about that, but let's go. Okay, so this one down here, as we remember, was our short opacity. I'm going to reduce that to 64 for the moment. I'll explain why a little bit later. Alright, so let's start building the rest of this chain here. So what I'm going to want first, I think, is I'm going to hit 1 and click to create a constant. This I'm going to put at 512 for the moment. What this is going to end up controlling is going to be the amount of shore. So we can start to differentiate and colorize between deep water and shallow water. So we've got that one there. We're going to come up and do a search for divide. Bring in a divide node. Okay, I'm going to plug this divide into the B, the constant into the B of the divide. I'm going to take the result of the subtraction of these and put that into the A of the divide. And then we're going to do a search for clamp and bring in a constant clamp. Okay, and we're going to clamp that value there. Oops, come here. Now the next thing we need is going to be a linear interpolate. So let's do a search for LIN, which will bring up our lerp. We'll drop a lerp into the scene. Now this chain here is going to create will be the alpha of the lerp here. So it's basically going to tell the lerp how to mix the values that we put into A and B, sorry. So they will be mixed based on this chain here. Now, to put into the actual A and B, we're going to put in some colors, and these colors are going to translate to what is going to be, I guess, our deep color and what is going to be our shallow color. Now, the big thing we need to remember here is that it's going to be a mix between what colors we're putting in here, the colors of the actual texture underneath the water, which we'll add in a little bit. So there's a few variables. So I actually like to use mostly gray colors here. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V that. Put one into the B, one into the A. Now the one, okay, into the A. So the one that's going into the A is actually going to be our shallow colorization. So I want this to be quite light, to be honest, because it's going to end up giving us a bit of a rim effect on the water. And double click this one. This is going to be our deep water, and I want our deep water to be dark. So essentially, the darker this is, the more reflective it will be in those areas. So that'll do for now. No, it's probably a little bit darker. I want give that a shot. Alright, that's fine. Now again, I'm just going to make myself a bit more room. I'm going to Control Alt and grab all that stuff that we've just made. And move that down a little bit. Oh, I grabbed the node I didn't need. You can go back up there. Okay. So what we need now is a multiply. M and click. Come out of the lerp into the B of the multiply, and what we're going to multiply it by is a dest color node. So what the dest color node does is it basically returns the value which will be a color of the pixel behind the one currently being drawn. So in this instance, that's great for water because we want our water to be colorized by what's happening underneath the water, because that's what happens in real life. A water will take on color based on its environment and based on what is happening underneath the water. So that's our dest color node, which is there. Now, at this point, we're going to need to create another linear interpolate. So just do a search and bring it in, or of course you could have just copy pasted it. Get that roughly where I want it. Now we can clean this up a bit later, it's all going to be a bit messy at the moment. Basically we want the result of our mixed normals and reflections to be going into the A of this lerp here. Into the B of the lerp we want the result of our opacity chain. And then in the alpha we're going to create a different chain. What I will do at this stage is I'll just take the out of the lerp into the diffuse, just so that's all cleaned up. And of course we're going to get an error because we don't have an alpha. We've got nothing to tell it how we want these two things to mix here. So we need yet another lerp. Incredibly useful node. We're going to come out of this lerp into the alpha, and then we need to fill these values here. So the first value, I'm going to hit 1 and click to create a constant, plug that into the A, 1 and click to create another constant, which is going to go into the B, and then into the alpha, I'm going to come up here and do a search for a Fresnel, drop that in there, and the Fresnel is going to go into the alpha. And I'm going to give the Fresnel an exponent of 2. Now again, I would implore you to go to the materials compendium, check out what Fresnel does. It can basically affect things based on the viewing angle. It's an incredibly handy node, so I definitely suggest checking that one out in a bit more detail. Now in this top node, I'm going to give it a value of, let's say, about 0.85 at the moment. This one I'm going to give this a value of about 1. And as I said, this is just going to affect the way our water works based on the angle that it's being viewed. So, got all that hooked up. Gravy. So we can try it out now. Now, as I said, it's always a big risk when we kind of create these large chains without having to test them first. But unfortunately, there's that many dependencies that we've had to do it this way. So let me just drag that out of the way. Hit our tick, and what we should start to see now is we're going to have some nice colorization around the rim, and we're also going to be getting a lot more transparency in the middle where our reflections currently are. Okay, so the colors I've used have probably pushed it a little bit too far, but you can see the kind of effect that I'm looking at here. So when we look at the kind of the edges of the water, we get this light colorization, and in the deeper parts of the water, you get a darker colorization, which actually ends up translating to a more reflective surface, or a more opaque surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down and change these colors a little bit so you can see the effect. So for the rim here, at almost pure white, the effect is probably a little bit too aggressive. So I'm just going to reduce that to a different sort of gray. And of course you can add color to this if you like. And what it will end up being is a mix between the color you choose here and the destination color underneath. So I'm just going to leave it, probably that is okay. And I do want my darkest to be dark. So I'm going to bring that right down so it's almost black. Hit green and let's have a look at that. Okay, so to me that's getting much better. So we have that nice kind of rim colorization happening there. In the deeper portions of the water, they're much more reflective, which is what we would ordinarily expect. So all in all, it's starting to look pretty good, I think. So I'll just show you one more thing we can do in here. I'll grab my normals. Kind of, I guess. So this is the trouble, is where can you put it that it's not going to look very messy? I guess I'll put them all the way down there. One final thing we can do is we can affect our normal strength quite easily if we want stronger scrolling normals. The way we're going to do that, and I'll do it further in the chain up here just so we're not having to dig down every time we want to have a look. So I'm just going to hit M and click to create a multiply up here. 1 and click to create a constant. The constant is going to go into the B. The output of our mixed normals is going to go into the A. And this I'm going to then put into the normal. And basically this value here is going to end up controlling the strength of our normals. So if I punch this up to something pretty ridiculous like 20, we should have very, very strong normals. What we might find is that our issue with the green out of bounds might reappear because we basically because we've strengthened the normal, so the material will become much more distorted. Let's hope UDK doesn't crash on me. Okay. So they are definitely stronger, probably not as much as I would have expected them to be with a value of 20. But what that's going to come down to is up here, which is where we're actually mixing them together. So let's try a different value in here, make the mix a little bit stronger. 0.08. Let's see what kind of an effect that has for us. Okay, so that's getting the mix a bit better. I'll just But as you can see, our old buddy green is back. Let me just minimize this and see if I'm still getting it on the right hand side. No, I'm not. So it appears to just be at the bottom of the screen. Now in editor we're going to see the green. If I go play in editor, or if I were to cook this game or something, it wouldn't be showing up as green because of that fix we did earlier. It would just be showing up as a bit of a gray thing. So we'll check that out now, see if it's really going to break our seed or not. Yeah, I know. Yeah. So you can see it at the bottom there. It's I guess, oh no, and yeah, sorry, it is on the right hand side as well. So of course this is the issue with making the material more distorted, as I said, is that effectively if we wanted to mitigate that green issue, we would have to scale. So in this instance, to be honest, I mean this water is relatively calm, so I'm happy to leave it down where we are rather than having to come back and kind of play around with the scaling to try to get a better effect. So I'm just going to set that almost back to where it was. 0.05 should be a little bit stronger. And the other thing I'll do is come back down and reduce the normal strength, because at 20 it is quite strong. All right, let's see, we got that. Yeah, so we got the green, but it's only just very barely there. And let's bring the normal strength down to about 10. And again, it'll be a juggle, so everything's a balance. Okay. Now it's still there, but to be honest, I'm not going to worry about that. That is such a small area of the screen that it's not going to be a big deal. Obviously, if it was still fluoro green, it would be a big deal, but I think we can get away with it. Now, that's pretty much it. We basically have the whole material here. From here, it's just doing little tweaks and kind of, getting things looking how you want. So what I'll do is, just as the final part of this tutorial, is go through the main constants that we have in here and basically just reiterate what they affect and what you can, what sort of values you can put in to change different things. So the first thing is this node here, which is our reflection colorization, which we can see at the moment is making our sky and reflections bluer than blue. If I were to actually change that, bring it back to something like more like a neutral gray, then we're going to get a lot more of a neutral neutral palette in the reflection there. There you go. That's looking all right. Okay, so you got your reflection color there. Here, as I said, you can affect a bit of contrast. It can always be good to come through and name your nodes like this, and obviously commenting and things like this. Here, we're scaling the render target, and that's just to get rid of that horrible green stuff. This constant here is going to control the mix of normals and reflection. This one here is going to control the amount of shore that we have for the purposes of colorization. This determines the actual shore opacity, so how transparent our shore is. This node here controls our normal strength. This was just to, oh, I probably don't need to comment that one, but that was just obviously to, as I explained before, to strip the blue channel out so they will mix correctly. I have a feeling they're probably the main ones that we needed to look at. Yep, I reckon that's pretty good. So, I'll say it's a bit messy now. You can always go through and spend the time to make sure none of your wires cross or something. Sometimes it's impossible, but it can be a bit of a good challenge. The other thing I'm going to do is create a high resolution image of this with all of these commented. So, so once you finish this tutorial, you'll have a handy little guide to look back and see, all the different nodes you can affect to get different effects. Let's hit the little play here. Okay, now I'm just going to jump in game, play from here, and bask in the glory of our intermediate real-time reflective water. Look at that. You can see it's much, much nicer than the old water we had. We have a lot of control over lots of little things like the colorization of the shore and things like that. So we've still got our simulations happening and we have a nice distorted reflection. So just see what it looks like from up top here. There you go. It's looking quite nice. So there you have it, guys. An intermediate water material, which you can always do a lot more work on, do your own tweaks and things like that based on your own research and experimentation. I hope you got a lot out of this tutorial series, and I really look forward to seeing some of the work you guys produce. Thanks very much, and I'll see you later.